Welcome to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by Dilatory Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the Brian Moe, the social media advisor for Dilatory, and I also happen to be a below-knee amputee. Let's get into today's episode. How's it going, everyone? On this episode of Amp Life, I want to share with you my own journey with limb loss. My first experience with limb loss took place when I was 3 years old and my paternal grandma became a below-knee amputee. As a young child, I never thought a lot about grandma being an amputee, probably because I just loved spending time with her, and she certainly never made her limb loss an issue. She never complained about it. And she never appeared to allow the fact that she lost her leg to slow her down or to even stop her from doing the things that she wanted to do. One day, shortly after my 4th birthday, I asked Grandma what happened to her leg, and she proceeded to tell me that she lost it and asked if I would help her find it. "Sure, Grandma, I'll help you." "Yes, Grandma, I would absolutely love to help you find your leg." Grandma told me to search the entire house and to let her know if I found it. Now, I looked everywhere. I did what Grandma asked me to do. I searched the downstairs, and then I even searched the upstairs. I looked everywhere, and finally I located Grandma's leg, and I was so proud of my accomplishment that I yelled downstairs to tell her. Grandma, well, she played along, and she expressed her delight for a job well done, and then asked me if I would bring her leg to her. I agreed, and just about the time I picked up her prosthesis to take it to her, my pap was outside working, and he fired up his chainsaw, at which point my grandma exclaimed, "Hurry up, Brian, before he cuts off my other leg." I immediately screamed, dropped her prosthesis, and took off running. Now, Pap, he had no idea what Grandma and I were doing in the house, and it was pure coincidence that he fired up his chainsaw at just the right moment. What was not a coincidence was that my grandma was smart enough to use that to her advantage and to have a little fun with her youngest grandchild. Grandma and Pap were perfect for each other. They were both as ornery as could be, sarcastic to the core, and they loved their family more than anything else. As my grandma grew older and developed other health problems, she was less physically active, and towards the end of her life spent most of her time in what she referred to as her day room. I always called it a sunroom because the entire outside wall was just a couple of large, nearly floor-to-ceiling pane glass windows, offering a spectacular view of their property and allowing in a lot of natural light. From this room, my grandma could watch Pap and my dad work in the garden. She could also watch the turkey, deer, and even the bears that came down out of the woods to enjoy the bounty of the garden. But Grandma could also watch my older brother Tommy and I play, and that's what she loved to do the most. My grandma had a heart attack in the spring of 1988, and she was admitted to the ICU in critical condition. In those days, children were not typically allowed in the ICU. However, because the mother of my best friend at the time ran the ICU, she allowed my aunt to take me in to see my grandma for what would be the final time on my 12th birthday, March 26, 1988. I had just lost my mom exactly 2 months prior to this, and here I was again back in the same hospital, and even at that young age I already knew what the outcome was going to be. My Aunt Moonine took me in to see my grandma, who was hooked up to all sorts of monitors and machines, and she appeared to me to be unconscious. I walked up to her bedside, placed my hand on hers, and I looked at her and said, "I love you, Grandma." And just as I turned to walk away, she looked my direction and said, "I love you too." And that was it. As I became older and would share stories with my dad about my grandma, he told me that after she lost her leg, he would frequently remark to her that he didn't understand how she stayed so positive all the time, and that he was sure if he were in her position, he would lose his mind. Today, I smirk a little when I think about that story because my dad passed away several years before I became an amputee. But not one day goes by that I don't wish that I could tell him that you don't lose your mind when you become an amputee. But you do have to make a conscious decision that you're going to do everything you can to overcome the challenges you're faced with and reclaim your life. And that's why I'm sharing my story. I want the world to know that it's not game over just because you lose a limb. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I'd say it's game on. I retired from pastoral ministry after nearly 20 years on November 13th, 2011. I had allowed the rigors and stress of pastoral ministry to take their toll on my physical health, and I decided that enough was enough. I knew that if I didn't make a dramatic lifestyle change, that I wouldn't be around much longer. I was morbidly obese. I had congestive heart failure and diabetes. My A1C was 14.5, which meant that my average blood sugar was 370, and my cholesterol was over 800. Leading up to my retirement, I enacted a provision in my contract which allowed me to take a 90-day paid medical leave. It was during this time that I began working with my doctors to develop a plan to get my weight down, get my A1C and cholesterol under control, and to just get healthy. After passing a physical examination in the spring of 2012, my cardiologist approved me to enter a medically supervised weight loss program. I began the program on a 1,200-calorie, mostly liquid diet, and I saw immediate results. The weight loss allowed me to get back into the pool and do what I love more than anything else, which is to swim. I was making great progress, and for the first time in years I was extremely happy, and I was starting to get healthy. Around the 1st of August of 2012, I noticed that I had cut my foot while swimming, and as a diabetic I knew that I needed to have it treated by a wound care doctor right away to prevent any complications from developing. I found a doctor with specialized wound care experience, and when I went for my appointment, they performed a debridement of the wound on my left foot and ordered an in-office x-ray of the same. They neglected, however, to wrap my foot following the debridement procedure, which meant I left a trail of blood on the floor on my way to get my foot x-ray. Now, you don't need a medical degree to know that when a liquid such as blood encounters germs, it pulls those germs into the source of the blood. Within a couple of days, this doctor had a lab report in their hands which indicated the appropriate course of action would be to admit me to the hospital on IV antibiotics. Armed with this information, this doctor instead called in a prescription for oral antibiotics, and neither the doctor nor their office followed up with me any further. I decided that I would see my PCP, who ran their own test, and who, when armed with the same identical information that the previous doctor had, decided to change the oral antibiotic to a different medication and send me on my way. I deteriorated quickly after that, and by the time my wife took me to the emergency room in the wee hours of Monday, August 13, 2012, I was in full-blown septic shock with multiple organ failure. The doctors told me later on that I had less than a 4% chance of surviving that night. That translates to the fact that 96.5% of all patients that go to the emergency room in septic shock with multiple organ failure will die. The doctors all agreed that when I walked down the hall of a medical facility with blood coming from an open wound, that's where I picked up MRSA. And according to a 2016 study published by Johns Hopkins University, there are more than 250,000 deaths from medical mistakes in the United States every year, making medical mistakes the third highest leading cause of death in the U.S. You know, at the time, I didn't realize how sick I was. I have memories of the ER staff working to stabilize me, and the attending physician asking me if I understood what was going on. They informed me that because my breathing was so shallow, they may have to intubate me, but eventually they opted instead for BiPAP as they frantically injected drugs into my body in an effort to stabilize my blood pressure and other vital statistics. Once I was stabilized, life flight was called. However, it was discovered that my luggage was a bit too heavy for the flight, and so the life flight crew transported me to the hospital via a mobile intensive care unit. My next memory is when the chief of orthopedic surgery was informing me that in order to save my life, he would have to amputate my left leg below the knee. I immediately told him to do whatever he has to do, before the resident surgeon and I argued about the fact that I wanted to wait until my wife was back at the hospital to do the surgery. The resident surgeon eventually agreed and allowed me to have my way, but also informed me that if my vitals started to drop in the middle of the night, they were doing the surgery regardless. Before autographing my left leg, the surgeon asked if I had any questions, to which I quickly said, "How long before I can swim?" And for those who don't know me, the pool is pretty much my natural habitat. You can find me there at least 3 or 4 days a week. I underwent a below-knee amputation of my left leg on Tuesday, August 14, 2012. The anesthesiologist gave me a spinal, but I really don't have any memory of the surgery at all, and for the next few days I drifted in and out of consciousness as well as reality. I'm sure because of the side effects of septic shock and organ failure had on my body, not to mention the heavy amount of morphine I was being given through my IV. One of the most valuable things that I did for myself while I was in the hospital was to request to see a psychologist. Now, a lot of people don't understand that at some point, amputees go through the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We all process through them differently, and with my background in clinical psychology and counseling, I knew that it would greatly benefit me to talk to someone to help process the stages of grief involved with losing a limb. I was discharged from the hospital to a rehab facility on August 12, 2012. When I arrived at the rehab facility, I was so weak that I could not even sit up on the edge of the bed, and I knew then that I had a long, difficult road ahead of me. But I was determined to work hard to reclaim my life. At first, things were great. They were absolutely wonderful, and I progressed rather quickly, and it didn't take long before the physical therapist had me out of bed and in the therapy gym. As my stamina and endurance grew, I became stronger, and I started hopping with the assistance of a walker. I was motivated, I was excited, and I looked forward every day to getting up and working hard in therapy. Not long after I arrived at the rehab facility, I met an above-knee amputee named Bob. Bob was probably old enough to be my dad, and we hit it off right away. We were both wrestling fans, and so aside from being amputees, we also had something else in common that we liked to discuss. Bob had a very positive outlook and attitude, and talking with him about life, our struggles, and our stories really helped me to grow and to realize that I still had my entire life ahead of me, and that losing my leg was a mere bump in the road. Everyone was excited and they were encouraged by my progress, but then it happened. During the first week of October 2012, one of the physical therapy students came to my room to get me for PT by themselves. They neglected to lock the wheels on the wheelchair, and as I was transferring from the bed to the wheelchair moved, and I fell, and I busted open my residual limb on the floor. In an instant, all my progress, all my excitement, and all my motivation were gone. Because of the negligence of this physical therapy student, I now had a hole in my residual limb the size of a Kennedy $50, and this was just the beginning of a major setback. Within 48 hours, I started getting septic again. I had become friends with one of the nurses who was about my age, and she did everything she could to keep me out of the hospital, including packaging me in ice to get my fever down. The medical director of the rehab facility wouldn't listen to her when she insisted I needed to be seen by my surgeon, and so she physically went and grabbed him by the hand and led him to my room. Once he examined me, he agreed, and I was transported back to the hospital, where I learned that my surgeon was out of town, and I met his newest assistant, Dr. Brian Moser. Now listen, if you or a friend or a loved one are in Central Ohio and you need an orthopedic surgeon, do yourself a favor, go to Orthopedic One in Upper Arlington, which is just outside of Columbus, and see Dr. Brian Moser. He's nothing short of absolutely amazing. Dr. Moser admitted me to the hospital for a week, during which time he performed 2 IND surgeries on my residual limb to get the infection under control. The thing that immediately impressed me about Dr. Scholl was that when it was my scheduled time for surgery and there were no orderlies around to take me to the operating room, he and the anesthesiologist came and wheeled me into the OR themselves. This had an incredible calming effect on me, and is one of those moments that leaves an indelible impression on your mind. Dr. Scholl made a potentially dangerous and admittedly frightening situation manageable through providing excellent care to both me and in reassuring my wife following each one of my surgeries. After about a week, I was discharged back to the rehab facility to continue my recovery, and I would end up spending a total of 7 of the longest months of my life in that facility. It was during my time recovering in the rehab facility that my wife and I thought it would be a clever idea to begin fertility treatments. In 2010, my wife was diagnosed with endometrial cancer, and the immediate treatment recommendation was a complete hysterectomy. After sharing with our OB/GYN oncologist that we would like to try to have children, he agreed to take a less invasive treatment, but cautioned us that the cancer could potentially spread. After what seemed like an eternity, my wife was declared cancer-free, and we were set up with a top fertility doctor in the area. I cannot even begin to express to you the emotions involved with going through fertility treatments. Any ladies listening who have gone through these treatments know exactly what I'm talking about, as do any men who have gone through these treatments with their wives. Combine all of the hormone-induced emotions of fertility treatments with the emotions of recovering from an amputation, and we were a hot mess for quite a while. We really, really were. I have so much empathy for anyone going through fertility treatments, especially after defeating cancer. And I have so much sympathy for anyone recovering from losing a limb. But combine all these elements at the same time, and I can honestly tell you that it was only by the grace of God that we came out stronger than we went in. A lot of people always want to say that God will never give us more than we can handle. And that's simply not true. It's not even biblical. Listen, if God never gave us more than we can handle, then we would never need God. And the only reason I'm on the other side of all of that is because I trusted God to take me through whatever I needed to go through for God to get me exactly where He wants me to be. It wasn't easy, not at all. In fact, it was the most difficult, grueling, raw, emotional experience of my entire life to this point. And even though the fertility treatments failed, I don't have any regrets. I wouldn't change anything. And if I had to do it all over again, I would. I would not be the person I am today without the experiences I've had. I left the rehab facility on March 23, 2013, as it was my goal to be discharged before my birthday, and I went home and I learned to adapt to our townhouse, and for a while I did fine. And then in the late spring of 2013, I was cast for my first prosthesis. During a routine follow-up with my orthopedic surgeon, he ordered an MRI to ensure that everything was looking good inside my leg. And that's when he discovered that there was infection in the bone and that I would need revision surgery as soon as possible to stop the infection from spreading. I was devastated. I was just heartbroken and absolutely devastated. Hearing him say that was like having the wind knocked out of me. By now I was completely healed, and my very next appointment that same day was to go and try my test socket. And instead, I now needed to have an additional 6 centimeters of bone removed and start the recovery process all over again. I had my revision surgery in the middle of May of 2013, and I healed much faster than I did with the initial amputation, and before long I had my first prosthesis, which was a pin lock system. I often ask amputees what it felt like the very first time they walked on their prosthesis, and for me it was absolutely amazing. I went from often feeling like I might never walk again to having the ability to start walking again. But I had a long way to go, and I was very anxious to get started. I went to outpatient physical therapy for a while. I walked a lot on the zero-gravity treadmill, which is really cool. And I also participated in aquatic therapy. Did you really expect anything less from the guy who loves to swim? And I also walked a lot on the aquatic treadmill. The biggest challenge for me in physical therapy was often being the teacher rather than the patient. I loved my therapist. Don't get me wrong, she was awesome and she helped me in so many ways. However, at the end of the day, I was often the one teaching her how to work with amputees, and that left me feeling flat and like I wasn't making any progress. My wife and I decided to move back home to Pittsburgh to be closer to family, and on November 1st, 2014, we did just that. While I was very excited about moving home, I was also very nervous about leaving Central Ohio because I had no idea where I would go for prosthetic care. I talked to my prosthetist about my concerns, and he recommended De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics in Pittsburgh. He didn't have a lot of personal experience with De La Torre, but he felt based on what I was looking for in a prosthetist that this would be the best option for me. After moving home and settling in, I began researching De La Torre as well as the other companies in Western Pennsylvania. I knew where I didn't want to go, and so I finally reached out to De La Torre through the contact form that's on their website, www.delatorreop.com. A little plug there. And it wasn't long before Drew Buffett, the director of prosthetics, gave me a call. I knew before I talked to Drew that I needed to see a PM&R doctor, and I had scheduled an appointment with Dr. Munin at the UPMC Kaufman Amputee Clinic. I don't remember exactly what Drew and I discussed, but it left such a lasting impression on me that when I saw Dr. Munin and he asked me if I knew which company that I wanted to go with, I quickly responded De La Torre. And that's when I met Kate for the first time. She's one of the prosthetists at De La Torre and someone who has witnessed firsthand the progress that I have made over these past few years. When I first moved home to Pittsburgh, I had an awful, ill-fitting, painful socket. At the time, I didn't have enough knowledge or experience with prosthetics to know that this wasn't the way things were supposed to be. I always blamed myself for the fact that I wasn't progressing with my prosthesis, and I always believed that I was the one doing something wrong. It was terribly frustrating for me. My wife and I would be out driving somewhere, and I'd literally have to pull over and take my prosthesis off because it hurt so badly. My frustration led to anxiety and depression and a lot of bitterness. Things got so bad that I no longer wanted to wear my prosthesis, and I often made excuses for why I wasn't. Just the thought of putting on my leg induced an anxiety attack because I knew within an hour, maybe two, that leg would be hurting so badly I'd have to take it off and my day would be over. It honestly seemed like a never-ending nightmare. In the past, I haven't always been good at effectively communicating what was going on with my leg. However, when I began working with Drew at De La Torre, we developed such a great rapport that he was able to clearly understand where I was and what needed to be done to get me into a socket that would work for me. Drew's patience and persistence paid off, and he got me into a new socket that fit like a glove. And that's the way your socket on your prosthesis should feel. If you're experiencing pain while wearing your prosthesis, or if it's uncomfortable to the point that you'd rather not wear it, talk to your prosthetist. Be open and honest about what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and ask them to help you find solutions. I cannot overstate the paramount importance of building a quality relationship with your prosthetist based on trust, mutual respect, and open communication. You need a prosthetist with whom you can build a rapport and that you genuinely like. Because if you don't like your prosthetist, find a new one. It's difficult to trust someone that you don't like, and you have to be able to trust your prosthetist without hesitation or equivocation. Now, there are going to be times in your prosthetic journey, especially early on, where it's going to feel like you see your prosthetist more than you see your own family. I understand all too well those feelings that creep in, where you think you don't want to bother them or you don't want to be a burden to them, and then you start to worry that because you call them all the time, they're going to start reacting with, "Oh no, not this person again." Listen, Don't be afraid to reach out to your prosthetist for help with any issues you're having. I have the privilege of interacting with some of the best prosthetists out there, and trust me, they want to help you. As amputees, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our families to take care of ourselves physically and mentally. And as I progressed through 2015, I was honestly failing to take care of myself physically. I started gaining weight, a lot of weight. And because I live with congestive heart failure, I was also filling up with fluid pretty quickly. I wasn't eating right and I wasn't taking my medication the way that my doctors had prescribed it. And it took me a while to realize what was going on. But in a matter of a few short months, I went from having a prosthesis that I could wear comfortably to most days not even being able to put my prosthesis on because I had gained so much weight and had so much fluid in my residual limb that it just no longer fit. Towards the latter part of 2015, it got to the point that I could barely take care of myself. And in the back of my mind, I knew that if things didn't change quickly, I would die much sooner than later. And I wasn't willing to allow that to happen, so I decided to do the only thing that I could do for myself: fight. In the last 10 days or so of 2015, I had been in almost daily contact with my nurse at my cardiologist office about how much weight I was putting on and that I felt like I was filling up with fluid. And let me tell you, I have the best cardiologist on the planet. Seriously. I know some people might say that's an exaggeration or say I'm using puffery, but Dr. Michael Moser is one of the top heart failure and transplantation cardiologists in the entire country. The guy even starred in UPMC's only Super Bowl commercial this year. And back in 2000, when I was first diagnosed with congestive heart failure and told I needed a heart transplant, I was linked up with Dr. Moser, who at the time was at Allegheny General. And when he told me he was leaving for UPMC, I told him that I was going with him. And it's been one of the best decisions of my life to have him as my primary cardiologist for nearly 20 years. It's this relationship with Dr. Moser that gave me a sense of peace and calm when I began getting deathly ill toward the end of 2015. And let me say that it was Dr. Moser who told me years ago that if I did everything he told me to do, I would never need a heart transplant. And he was right, because my name came off that list, not because I got a transplant, obviously not because I died, but because I got to the point in my journey where I no longer needed a transplant because I chose to listen to Dr. Moser. After about a week of not showing any signs of improvement, on December 28, 2015, my nurse advised me to come to the emergency room at UPMC Presbyterian. I was admitted to the ER in critical condition with a BNP of 402, indicating severe heart failure. And after a battery of tests, I was admitted to the Cardiovascular Institute's wing at UPMC Presbyterian. My body weight upon being admitted to the hospital was 500 pounds. That's a quarter ton. Here I was, 39 years old, in the hospital, near death with severe heart failure, and I weighed in at a quarter ton. I may have been at the heaviest weight of my entire life, but I was also at the lowest point of my life. I decided then and there what I was going to do was work with my doctors, nurses, physical therapists, and dietitians to do whatever was necessary in order to get healthy. I spent the next 47 days in the hospital, during which time I not only learned how to eat properly, counting carbs and calories, but I also started getting in much better physical condition as the weight came off and I endured the rigors of physical therapy. The doctors had removed so much fluid from my body that my socket on my prosthesis no longer fit me at all. But true to form, De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics was with me all the way. Kate came to the hospital and she cast me for a new socket while I was still in the hospital. And she and Drew worked tirelessly to get the socket done because I couldn't be transferred to inpatient rehab until I had a new leg. Once I had that leg and I was transferred to inpatient rehab, I went to physical therapy 3 times a day. Kate would come to the first session of the day to make any adjustments that I needed and to ensure that the prosthesis was fitting properly. And when Kate wasn't available, Rachel came in. And when the weekend rolled around and I had an urgent issue that needed dealt with, Brian came in. The incredible thing about De La Torre is that there's always someone available 24/7, 365 to handle any emergencies that come up with your prosthesis. There's an emergency hospital line that patients can call and they can get linked up pretty quickly. It was during my time in inpatient rehab that I met one of the toughest, yet also one of the most amazing and kindest physical therapists I've ever worked with. Ruth put me through the paces daily, and she constantly pushed me to do more than I thought I could do. I learned very quickly never to say "I can't" with Ruth, because every single time you say that, she makes you do even more. I knew that this was simply the beginning for me. I had been given another opportunity at life. I worked hard, I advocated for myself, and I surrounded myself with an amazing team of professionals who worked with me to get back on track. I was discharged from the hospital after 47 days on February 12, 2016, and I knew that this was my launching point. When we left the hospital, I insisted to my wife that I drive home because 1, she absolutely hates driving in Pittsburgh, and 2, I hadn't driven in nearly 2 months. The very first thing I noticed was that I could fit in the driver's seat without any issues whatsoever. Prior to being admitted to the hospital, my stomach pushed up against and onto the steering wheel because I had gained so much weight. But now, having lost 120 pounds while I was in the hospital, this was no longer an issue for me. After being released from the hospital, I followed up with my physiatrist, Dr. Michael Munin, at the UPMC amputee clinic. Dr. Munin has been treating me since I moved back home to Pittsburgh, and he's not just another PM&R doctor. He's one who specializes in amputees. And Dr. Munin does a rather great impression of me from when he first met me and I was completely out of shape and beyond morbidly obese. His impression makes me laugh because while being 500 pounds admittedly is nothing to laugh at, the way Dr. Munin mimics me is actually pretty funny. Dr. Munin agreed to send me to outpatient physical therapy, but not just to any therapist. He wanted me to see Lisa at UPMC Mercy Southside. The difference between Lisa and every other physical therapist I've seen on an outpatient basis is that Lisa is an expert in treating amputees. She's no nonsense and she's tough. But that's exactly the kind of therapist that I and, quite honestly, most amputees need. I talked earlier about growing frustrated with PT because I became the teacher. And with Lisa, I was the student and the patient 100% of the time. The more I progressed in my journey after getting out of the hospital, the more I realized that in order to produce optimal amputee lifestyle results, the team approach must be utilized. My team is probably a little different than your team or than what your team should be, but at a minimum, I recommend that your team should include yourself, a prosthetist, a physiatrist, or as I often call them, a PM&R doctor, and a physical therapist as needed. Presently, my team consists of myself, my prosthetist, my PM&R doctor, my cardiologist, endocrinologist, rheumatologist, and dietitian. I sometimes joke that I have so many people studying me that I should be able to grant degrees. I'm not currently seeing physical therapy, but that will change down the road as I move into the next phase of my journey. I did, however, start attending the amputee walking school when it comes to Pittsburgh. Last month, I had the pleasure of interviewing Dennis and Todd from AWS for the Amp Life podcast, and they have some amazing stories and advice to share. By the way, that episode, as well as every episode of Amp Life, is available on our website, www.amplifepodcast.com. I was so impressed with Dennis and Todd, and it just so happened that the day we recorded the episode was also the day they were having the AWS in Pittsburgh, and so I went. And Dennis helped me start to clean up my gait. And for those who don't know or aren't aware, the amputee walking school is free, and it's for any amputee to attend, regardless of where you are in your journey, regardless of whether or not you have a leg. I highly recommend visiting their website, www.amputeewalkingschool.com, to find out when they're going to be in your area. Because like I said, Dennis worked with me for a couple of hours that day, and he really helped to clean up my gait and corrected some things that I have done incorrectly for so long. And when you've done it the wrong way for such a long period of time, it's hard to break those habits, which is why I plan to go back to the amputee walking school every month until I break those habits and improve my gait. Going to physical therapy, though, isn't enough. You need to be willing to do the work at home or at your local gym or YMCA. I love to swim, and so I swim. I'm in the pool at the Y swimming laps there 3 times a week at least, and I make it my goal to walk a little more every single day. Dennis also has me getting on the leg press and the abductor machine, and so I'm really starting to do all kinds of different things, which ultimately improve my health, but are also going to help me walk better. Since I was admitted to the hospital back on December 28th of 2015, I have progressed from not walking and relying completely on a wheelchair to moving to a walker, then to a cane, and now to mostly nothing. I'm not yet 100% device-free, but that is certainly my long-term goal, but it's going to take a lot of work on my part to get there. Today, my cholesterol is 200. Remember, I told you it was 800 back in 2012. And my A1C, which was 14.5 when I first became an amputee, is now 7. There is still room for improvement, and it will happen as I lose more weight. I also shared with you that I was 500 pounds, a quarter ton, when I was admitted to the hospital on 12/28 of 2015. Today I weigh 285 pounds, and I continue to lose weight. As an amputee, I can genuinely tell you that if you're overweight, take action. Weight loss got me mobile, and it changed my gait pattern for the better, and not only has it improved my overall health and function, but weight loss gives me access to a wider variety of components to be used in making my prosthesis. Now, because I want my everyday prosthesis to be waterproof so that I can use it when I swim, I currently have a Rush Rogue foot, Ohio Willowwood LimLogic vacuum pump, with an Autobach pre-bent suspension sleeve, and a De La Torre custom Interflex socket. This system works extremely well for me and it meets my needs, but I also understand that not every system or foot is going to be ideal for every amputee. And that's why I encourage you to work with your prosthetist and your physiatrist to determine what components will work best for you. This journey has not been easy. And God bless my wife, Amanda. She has been through my side and by my side through all of this, my biggest fan and number one cheerleader all the way. I have seen relationships destroyed after someone loses a limb, especially when one spouse must become the primary caregiver for the other. But my wife has been just a trooper. She has gone above and beyond, and she is my hero. And I would not be here today without her. My journey is not over yet. I still have a lot of hard work to do. And so do you. I often use the hashtag on social media, I'm not done yet. Because there is no quit. There is no stopping. There is no tapping out. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. And the only way you're going to progress and move forward in your journey is to take decisive action. When it comes to weight loss, you've got to want it as much as you want to breathe. When it comes to successfully living the amputee life, you've got to want it as much as you want to breathe. When you desire something on that level, then you will act to achieve those desires. It's so easy just to sit on the couch or to sit in your wheelchair and feel sorry for yourself. But you've got to rise above that. Every day I see amputees who are stuck where they're at because they choose to give in to feeling sorry for themselves, and they engage in destructive, negative self-talk. Listen, I understand. I've done that. I've been where you are. People are constantly saying that they want someone to build them up, when the reality is that you must choose to start building yourself up. When I was in inpatient rehab in 2016, I wore a t-shirt every day that said, "I can, I will." And sure, that was the shirt at the time of WWE superstar Roman Reigns. But I wasn't wearing that shirt for Roman. If you know anything about me at all, you know I am not a Roman Reigns fan. But I was wearing that shirt to remind myself that I can do this, and I will do this. I would go into the bathroom in my room, and I would look in the mirror, and I would repeat that phrase to myself repeatedly. Because before I could expect others to encourage me and build me up, I had to do it for myself first. I know exactly what it's like to feel depressed and bitter as an amputee. And I know exactly what it's like to feel alone, like no one cares about you. I know exactly what it's like to have people in society, at the store, at the gym, look at you differently, and through their words and actions make you feel like you're less than a complete, capable human being. When I became an amputee, I essentially lost all my friends. People who I had been friends with for years walked out of my life when I needed them the most. I was devastated, and in order to cope, I used to tell myself that they just didn't know how to respond, when the reality is they weren't really my friends to begin with. I've been in the grocery store, and I've been at Walmart, and I've seen the look some people give, and I used to let it bother me. But the more I recovered, the more I refused to allow other people to steal my joy. Because listen to me. Listen, if you don't get anything else that I tell you in this podcast today, I want you to hear this. How other people choose to treat you reflects who they are as a person, not who you are. If you're feeling depressed, seek out a counselor, a psychologist, or a therapist to help you process the changes in your life, but also to help you set attainable goals that will help you move forward with life. It's also okay to be bitter, but you can't stay bitter forever. I felt like my life was stolen from me by the doctor who cost me my leg. For the longest time, I hated her, and I mean real, genuine, authentic hate. I'm not talking about flippantly using that word like when we're children. You know, my brother and I would fight. He's 7 years older than I am, and when we were children, we would fight, and I would say, "Tommy, I hate you." I'm not talking about flippantly using the word hate. I genuinely, legitimately, biblically hated this woman. I became depressed, bitter, mean, nasty, and generally unbearable to be around because for too long I allowed the bitterness to consume me. I reached a point while I was in the nursing home in November 2012, where I decided that ending my life was the best option. It wasn't just a pity party. I wasn't just feeling sorry for myself. I had a viable plan at the time. I was prescribed 2 milligrams of Xanax at bedtime, and I began cheeking them and saving them because I had Googled how much I would need for a lethal dose, and I ended up with that amount and more. A nurse who had befriended me during that time said to me, "I wish you realized how much you have to live for." And that was all it took, because she was right. She was right then, and I'm right now. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, guilt, bitterness, or anything else, whether you're an amputee or not, you have so much to live for. The power of positivity is real, but more than that, the unfathomable grace of God can accomplish anything in your life. After that, I demanded that the nursing home give me access to a board-certified psychologist to help me work through my anger and bitterness. And in the end, he told me what I already knew. The only reason that I was able to rise above my situation was because I wanted to rise above my situation just as much as I wanted to breathe. If you had known my dad, you would understand why I refuse to accept excuses from people. Amputees will say, "I don't wear my leg because," and then they throw in some excuse. And that's all it is. Just excuses for not doing what you know that you're supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to put amlactin on my right leg every single day. It's prescribed to me by my physiatrist, but I usually only do it a few days before my appointment so that it appears that I'm doing it. The other day, Christian, who is one of the prosthetists at De La Torre, saw a picture of me online that Rush Foot shared on social media, and he emailed me and told me to put my lotion on. Sometimes we need people to tell us what to do because we refuse to do what's in our best interest. Thanks to that email from Christian, I am now very cognizant about putting my lotion on. And friend, if you want someone to listen, reach out to me. And while I'll give you an understanding, even sympathetic ear, I'm not just going to coddle you and tell you what you want to hear, nor am I going to allow you to make excuses. If your prosthesis doesn't fit, or it hurts, or it's uncomfortable to wear, call your prosthetist at once. Don't delay. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Get on the phone. Call your prosthetist. Communicate with them and allow them to help you with the solutions that you need so that you can wear your leg. If you have a functioning prosthesis, then the first thing that you need to do when you wake up in the morning is to put it on. That's the very first thing you need to do. I went from not wearing my prosthesis to barely wearing my prosthesis, and then once I went through therapy, I went through the stages where you wear it a little bit more each day. Today, I now wear my prosthesis 18 hours a day, every single day, without fail. But the last thing you should do if you have a functioning prosthesis is to put it on and then sit on the couch watching TV for the next 8 hours. Walk around your house, go outside, go to the gym or the YMCA. Do something to start getting yourself active again. Just like my cardiologist told me when I was first recovering with heart failure, walk 2 minutes 3 times a day, and then every day increase that time. If you're confined to a wheelchair temporarily, get a couple of 5-pound dumbbells and a stationary hand cycle to build your arms and your cardiovascular endurance. That's exactly what I did when I was confined to a wheelchair, and it will work. The biggest thing you need to realize is that you are not in this journey alone. Connect with other amputees on social media through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Attend amputee support groups in your area. And choose to become as active as you can, because the more active you become as an amputee, the healthier you will become both physically and mentally. The more you work at it, the more things will get better and improve over time. If you would have told me a year ago that I would be hosting Amp Life and running social media for De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics, I might have asked you for a shot of whatever you were drinking, because I never envisioned myself in this role. I was perfectly happy with wearing my slippers, daytime drinking, and playing video games. And 2 of those things I didn't actually do, and you can figure out the one I did actually do. But God had other plans, and He used my sarcasm to bring me to the dance. Late last summer, I was in to see Drew to have my leg adjusted, and just in casual conversation, I said to him, "You know, your social media sucks." And he said, "Yeah, I know." And we talked about other things. And I wasn't trying to be rude or anything. I was just been talking about how I like doing business with companies who are active on social media and have a good social media presence. And I use a lot of sarcasm because I like to confuse people about whether I'm serious or whether I'm joking. Well, a couple of weeks later, I was in to see Drew again, and he says, "Remember when you told me our social media sucks?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember." And Drew says to me, "How would you like to do something about that?" I said, "Sure." And I ended up going into a meeting, and they made me an offer, and here I am. And when Joyce first asked me about doing a podcast, I was very hesitant and very reluctant, and I had other ideas at the time. But the truth is, I really didn't have an interest because, to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing. But I do know that everything in life is about timing. If you allow Him to, God will put you where you need to be, when you need to be there. And it ended up that I was asked to be a guest on the Nobody's podcast, along with Drew and Ed De La Torre, who's the owner and president of De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics. And let me tell you, first, I highly recommend the Nobody's podcast. I think you should check them out. Their website is twonobodies.com. That's www.twonobodies.com. Check them out. They have some awesome podcasts that will actually really help you in life with things with your health and your mental wellness and all sorts of things. It's a really great podcast. Please check that out. But one of their hosts, Will, he has been and is an invaluable asset to me. Will has provided me with excellent podcast training, as well as advice and counsel and insight on various issues and challenges. And I can honestly tell you that the Amp Life podcast would not be here, or at least would not be where it is, without Will. Will also edits our shows, and he maintains the show's website, amplifepodcast.com. Check out Will. Check out the services that he offers and things about his life that he's involved in. These guys are all that do Two Nobodies. They're all doctors of physical therapy. They're highly educated, and they're just great guys. But check out Will's website also, www.willboydpt.com. That's www.willboydpt.com. And I'll also provide a link to all the sites mentioned today in the episode description. Listen, you can do anything with your life, absolutely anything. Don't allow fear, anxiety, insecurities, or depression to hold you back. Don't allow an ill-fitting prosthesis to hold you back. Choose to start living your best life today. Fight like you have never fought before. Work hard. Engage in positive self-talk, because you can do this. And if you want to, you will do this. Never give up. Never quit. There is freedom waiting for you on the breezes of the sky. And you ask, what if I fall? Oh, my friend, what if you fly? I'm the Brian Moe. For more information about me, please visit my website, www.thebrianmoe.com, or connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at @thebrianmoe. Until next time, remember this. Of all the things you can be in this world, be kind. You've been listening to Amp Life, the #1 podcast for amputees, hosted by an amputee, and brought to you by De La Torre Orthotics and Prosthetics, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a review on iTunes or give us a like on Facebook. I'm the Brian Moe. I invite you to visit our website, www.amplifepodcast.com, or check us out on Facebook at Amp Life Podcast.